As I stood at the threshold of forever, a sense of anticipation and excitement welled up inside me. The chapel was adorned with white lilies, and soft music played in the background. My heart raced beneath the delicate lace of my ivory gown, and my hand trembled slightly as I held onto my bouquet of crimson roses. My bridesmaids, radiant in their matching dresses, smiled at me with warmth and encouragement, but it was the sight of Michael waiting for me at the altar that truly took my breath away. His dark eyes locked onto mine, a mixture of joy and apprehension flickering within their depths. The priest's voice echoed through the chapel, and my father gently guided me down the aisle. It felt like an eternity, each step measured, each moment etching itself into my memory. Michael's smile was brilliant, yet there was something in his eyes that I couldn't quite decipher. As I reached the altar, he extended his hand to take mine. Our fingers intertwined, and I felt a comforting squeeze, a silent reassurance that everything would be all right. We turned to face the priest, and the ceremony began. In the midst of exchanging our vows, I glanced at Michael, and I couldn't help but notice a subtle flicker of doubt in his gaze. My heart ached with uncertainty, but I pushed it aside, telling myself it was just the nerves of the big day. The reception was a grand affair, with friends and family celebrating our union. The clinking of glasses and laughter filled the air, but something hung over us, a cloud of tension that I couldn't ignore. My eyes met Sarah's, my mother-in-law, across the room, and she wore an expression that could curdle milk. As I approached her, extending a hand in greeting, her disdain was palpable. "Evelyn, is it?" she sneered, her voice dripping with venom. I had hoped Michael would find someone more suitable. I blinked, taken aback by her hostility. "I love your son, Sarah," I stammered, trying to keep my composure. She scoffed, her eyes narrowing. "Love! Love doesn't put food on the table or secure his future. You're nothing more than a pretty distraction." Before I could respond, Michael appeared at my side, his expression tense. "Mom, let's not ruin this day," he said through clenched teeth, a note of frustration in his voice. Sarah turned away, but not before shooting me one last venomous glare. The rest of the evening was a blur of awkward encounters and strained conversations, leaving me with a sinking feeling that our wedding had been marred by more than just a disapproving mother-in-law. As the night drew to a close, I looked at my new husband, his aloofness now impossible to ignore. The lingering doubts I had ignored throughout the day came crashing down like a wave. What had I gotten myself into? The first few years of our marriage were marked by an unsettling unease. The memory of our wedding day lingered like a shadow, and the strain it had placed on my relationship with Michael was impossible to ignore. Michael and I were determined to build a life together, and our son, born not long after the wedding, became the beacon of hope that kept us going. His laughter filled our home, providing a momentary escape from the discord that often plagued our marriage. Sarah, my mother-in-law, had a relentless presence in our lives. Almost daily, she would grace us with her unwelcome visits. Each encounter between us was rife with tension, her disapproval of me remaining as palpable as ever. Yet, I held on to the belief that love could conquer all, even the sharp tongue of a critical mother-in-law. One chilly evening, as I busied myself in the kitchen preparing dinner, Michael returned home from work. He had been increasingly distant, spending long hours at the office and arriving home with an air of detachment. Our once affectionate relationship had dwindled into mere coexistence. As Michael entered the kitchen, his gaze remained fixed on the floor, avoiding eye contact. His silence was deafening, and it weighed heavily on my heart. I put down the knife I was using and turned to face him. "Michael, we need to talk," I ventured cautiously, my voice trembling. "Our marriage is slipping away, and I don't know how much longer I can bear this constant tension with your mother." He let out a sigh, his shoulders slumping as he finally met my gaze. "Evelyn, I know it's been tough, but my mother, she's stubborn. I don't want to lose you, but she's my family too." I couldn't help the tears that welled up in my eyes. "Michael, I love you, and I love our son. But we can't keep living like this. We deserve a peaceful life together." His expression softened, and he reached out to touch my hand. "I promise, I'll talk to her. Maybe we can find a way to make this work." Hope flickered within me, and I nodded. The weight on my chest momentarily lifted. Little did I know that even as we attempted to salvage our marriage, more challenges lay ahead, and the strain between us would continue to deepen. Life continued its relentless march forward, and the fragile truce in our marriage held, though tenuously. It was another ordinary day in our family nest when the storm descended once more. The sun cast a warm golden glow into the living room as I anxiously waited for the inevitable. Sarah, my mother-in-law, was due for her regular visit, and the knot of anxiety in my stomach tightened as the minutes ticked by. Michael, as always, acted as the mediator, greeting his mother at the door and leading her into the living room while he retreated to the kitchen to prepare coffee. I had learned through countless encounters that engaging Sarah in conversation was like dancing on a minefield. But today, perhaps out of desperation or naivety, I decided to take a risk. Sarah, I began cautiously, attempting a smile. How have you been? Her gaze, sharp as ever, bore into me as she took a seat on the sofa. Evelyn, she replied, her tone laden with thinly veiled contempt. I've been better. Your presence is always such a reminder of what might have been. I bit my lip, struggling to maintain composure. I understand that we've had our differences, but I love your son, and I want to make this work for the sake of our family. Her laughter was bitter, cutting through the room like a cold wind. Love, love, love won't pay the bills or provide for my son's future. Before I could respond, a sudden, blood-curdling scream pierced the air. Panic seized me, and I rushed towards the source of the sound. Sarah was writhing in agony on the living room floor, clutching her chest. Her anguished cries filled the room, echoing in my ears. My heart raced as I knelt beside her, unsure of what to do. Michael, alerted by his mother's screams, dashed into the room, his face contorted with fear. Evelyn, call an ambulance, he yelled, panic etched across his features. I fumbled for my phone, trembling fingers dialing the emergency number. Please hurry, I whispered, my voice quivering. The ambulance arrived with a sense of urgency, and paramedics swiftly attended to Sarah. Michael and I stood by, helpless and anxious, as they assessed her condition. Minutes felt like hours, and the weight of the situation hung heavily in the air. After a thorough examination, the paramedic turned to us, his expression grave. We need to transport her to the hospital immediately. It appears to be a cardiac issue. As they wheeled Sarah out of the house on a stretcher, Michael turned to me, his face pale and his voice trembling. Evelyn, come with us to the hospital. We need to be there for her. I nodded, my concern for Sarah overriding the tension that had defined our relationship. In that moment, it didn't matter that our marriage was strained or that Sarah had been a constant thorn in my side. What mattered was the well-being of the woman who had brought Michael into this world. As we sped toward the hospital, my mind raced with worry and uncertainty. Little did I know that this unexpected turn of events would irrevocably alter the course of our lives, setting in motion a series of events that would test the very limits of our marriage and my own resilience. The emergency room was a whirlwind of activity as we arrived at the hospital. The harsh fluorescent lights and the antiseptic smell filled the air, a stark contrast to the tranquil afternoon we had just left behind. Sarah lay on a hospital bed, her face etched with pain as a team of doctors and nurses surrounded her, their voices a cacophony of urgency. Michael and I stood on the periphery, our anxiety growing with every passing moment. I felt a pang of guilt that I couldn't entirely suppress. No matter our differences, seeing Sarah in such distress was undeniably unsettling. The head doctor approached us, his demeanor professional but stern. We're running some tests to determine the cause of her pain, he explained, his voice measured. It could be cardiac in nature, but we'll need to wait for the results. Michael nodded, his worry etched on his face. Thank you, doctor. Please do whatever is necessary to help her. As we waited, the minutes dragged on, and the tension in the room thickened. Sarah's cries had subsided, replaced by an eerie silence that hung over us like a shroud. Finally, the doctor returned, his expression grave. He held a clipboard in his hand, and he met our eyes with a mix of sympathy and concern. I'm afraid the tests show that your mother has suffered a cardiac event, he said gently. She will need to be admitted for further observation and treatment. Michael's shoulders sagged, and he turned to me, his voice heavy with worry. I nodded, my concern for Sarah overshadowing the complicated dynamics of our relationship. Of course, Michael. I hope she recovers quickly. As they wheeled Sarah away to her hospital room, I was left alone in the stark hospital waiting area, the sterile surroundings mirroring the turmoil in my heart. I couldn't help but wonder what had caused Sarah's sudden illness and what it might mean for our already strained family dynamics. Hours turned into an anxious wait, and finally, Michael called with an update. Sarah was stable, but she would need to remain in the hospital for a few days for observation. He sounded exhausted and worried, torn between his loyalty to his mother and his responsibilities as a husband and father, I rushed to the hospital to be by his side, our shared concern for Sarah momentarily uniting us in a common purpose. The awkwardness and tension that had defined our marriage seemed to fade in the face of this crisis, replaced by a shared sense of responsibility and a glimmer of hope that perhaps, in this moment of vulnerability, we could find a way to bridge the rift that had divided us for so long. As we sat together in the dimly lit hospital room, waiting for Sarah to wake and offer some clarity on what had transpired, I couldn't help but wonder if this unexpected turn of events might be the catalyst for change. A chance for our family to heal, or perhaps an opportunity for me to finally break free from the oppressive grip of a strained marriage and my manipulative mother-in-law. Days turned into a week as Sarah remained hospitalized. Michael and I took turns staying by her bedside, our shared concern for her health, an unspoken bond that momentarily overshadowed the tumultuous dynamics of our marriage. It was during those long hours of waiting, in the sterile hospital room, that I found myself reflecting on the life I had led and the choices that lay before me. One evening, as I watched Sarah sleeping fitfully, her frail form connected to various monitors, Michael turned to me, his voice weary but earnest. "Evelyn, I know this has been incredibly difficult for all of us, but I can't help thinking about the future." I nodded, my gaze still fixed on Sarah. "What do you mean, Michael?" He sighed, his fingers drumming nervously on the arm of the chair. "I mean, if something were to happen to my mother, I would have to take care of her estate and finances. And, well, we're not exactly in the best financial situation ourselves." His words hung in the air, heavy with implications. I understood the underlying message. The burden of his mother's care would inevitably fall on us, and our already strained marriage would be further tested. I met his eyes, my own filled with a mixture of frustration and resignation. "Michael, I've tried to make this work, for us and for our son. But how much more can we endure? Your mother's constant presence, the tension between us, it's become unbearable." He looked away, guilt and sadness etched on his face. "I know, Evelyn, and I appreciate everything you've done. But if we don't find a solution, it'll only get worse. My mother has made it clear she expects us to take care of her." The weight of the situation pressed down on me, and I felt a growing sense of desperation. It was a realization that had been lurking in the back of my mind for some time, but now it had been laid bare. We couldn't continue like this. Something had to change. Days turned into weeks as Sarah's condition slowly improved, and we were finally faced with the prospect of her discharge. I watched as Michael spoke to the doctor about the necessary follow-up care and the changes that would be required at home to accommodate her needs. As we left the hospital that day, Michael turned to me with a heavy sigh. "Evelyn, I've been thinking about our situation. I don't want to put you through this anymore, and I don't want to jeopardize our son's future. My mother insists we take care of her, but I know it's not fair to you." I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. "What are you saying, Michael?" He hesitated for a moment before finally uttering the words that would change the course of our lives. "Evelyn, I've thought long and hard about it. If you agree, we could pay my mother $5,000 a month to ensure her care. It would give us some breathing room, and we wouldn't have to be so directly involved in her life." My mind raced as I considered the implications of his proposal. It was a significant amount of money, and it would mean making sacrifices in our own lives. But it was also a potential way out of the suffocating grip of our strained marriage and my overbearing mother-in-law. I nodded slowly, my voice filled with a mix of resignation and determination. "All right, Michael. If it's the only way to make this work, I'll agree to it." He looked relieved, though a hint of sadness still lingered in his eyes. "Thank you, Evelyn. I know it's not ideal, but maybe this will give us a chance to find some semblance of normalcy again." Little did I know that agreeing to Michael's proposal would set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately lead to a life-altering decision, one that would test the limits of my patience, resilience, and the strength of my will to finally break free from the oppressive bonds that had bound me for far too long. As the months went by, I found myself grappling with the weight of our agreement. Paying Sarah $5,000 a month strained our finances, but it did offer a temporary respite from her constant presence. Our family lived on the edge, with mounting bills and dwindling savings. The strain in our marriage persisted, even as we attempted to regain some semblance of normalcy. But the sense of unease lingered, like a storm cloud threatening to unleash its fury once more. And then came the day when it all unraveled. A few months after our agreement, I could no longer bear the mounting pressure. The burden of paying Sarah and the ongoing tension between Michael and me had taken a toll on my emotional well-being. I found myself contemplating the unthinkable. How to end this torment and finally find freedom. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast long shadows across our living room, I made up my mind. I couldn't continue living this way, trapped in a loveless marriage and a financial struggle. I needed to break free, not just for my sake, but for the sake of our son. I contacted a lawyer and began the process of filing for divorce. The weight of that decision sat heavily on my shoulders as I waited for the right moment to present the divorce documents to Michael. I knew it would be a difficult conversation, one that could shatter the fragile peace we had managed to maintain. Finally, the day came when I mustered the courage to confront Michael. I handed him the divorce papers, my hands trembling with anxiety. "Michael, we can't keep living like this," I began, my voice shaking. "Our marriage has become a prison, and I can't do it anymore." He stared at the papers, disbelief written across his face. "Evelyn, how did you make up your mind? We had an agreement." I took a deep breath, my resolve unwavering. "I've thought about it long and hard, Michael. This is the only way to break free from the constant turmoil. I can't keep paying your mother and enduring her constant presence." He stood there like a statue for what felt like an eternity, his mind processing the sudden turn of events. The weight of my decision hung in the air, suffocating us both. But it was too late for him to change my mind. If he refused to cooperate, the divorce would proceed, and he would be subpoenaed. The realization hit him, and he finally spoke, his voice filled with resignation. "No, I will never sign this." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving me alone in the dimly lit room, clutching the divorce papers that represented my newfound hope for freedom. A few days later, he received a summons to court, and there was no way out. During the intervening time, I and my lawyer worked diligently to build a solid case, conducting investigations, gathering evidence, and preparing for the impending legal battle. The day of the trial arrived, and Michael stood before the judge, his nerves palpable. I watched as he stumbled through his testimony, his words inconsistent and contradictory. It became clear that he was struggling to maintain the facade of our strained marriage. As I sat beside my lawyer, I felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. This was the culmination of months of planning, the moment when I would either break free from the oppressive grip of my mother-in-law and a loveless marriage or risk losing everything. The judge's verdict was a testament to the strength of our case. Michael's testimony had faltered, and the evidence we presented was compelling. The court ruled in my favor, granting me custody of our child and the opportunity to move to another city, away from the toxic environment that had held me captive for far too long. As the gavel fell and the courtroom emptied, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief and vindication. This was my chance to finally escape the chains that had bound me, to forge a new path for myself and my child. It was a bittersweet victory, one that came at a great cost, but offered the promise of a brighter future. With my victory in court, I seized the opportunity to start anew, leaving behind the painful memories of a marriage that had once held promise, but had ultimately crumbled under the weight of its own dysfunction. It was the beginning of a journey towards self-discovery, and a chance to reclaim my life on my terms. The courtroom victory marked the end of one chapter in my life and the dawn of a new era. As the legal proceedings concluded, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and a glimmer of hope for the future. With the judge's ruling in my favor, I had gained custody of our child and was free to move to another city, away from the toxic environment that had held me captive for far too long. The days that followed were a whirlwind of packing, farewells, and goodbyes to friends and family who had been witnesses to the tumultuous years of my marriage. I knew that leaving behind the life I had known wouldn't be easy, but it was a necessary step towards reclaiming my own sense of self. One sunny morning, as I loaded the last of our belongings into the car, my son's excited chatter filled the air. He had sensed the change and was eager to embark on this new adventure with me. I couldn't help but smile at his innocence, grateful for the fresh start that awaited us. As we drove away from the city that had been both a place of joy and suffering, a sense of liberation washed over me. The weight of the past began to lift, and I looked ahead to the future with renewed determination. I had taken a leap of faith, and now it was time to build a life free from the oppressive bonds of my strained marriage and my overbearing mother-in-law. Our new city was a breath of fresh air, filled with opportunities and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. I secured a job that allowed me to support my son comfortably, free from the financial burden that had plagued our previous life. The sense of independence was exhilarating, and I relished the chance to make decisions for myself and my child.